is the widow of President Marcos, Imelda Marcos, who had to appear in that courthouse for close to 4 months of trial for this alleged violation of that RICO law of the United States of America. Again, all the documents that came from the Swiss banks, Swiss government, the documents that were obtained from Malacanang, from the vaults and the filing cabinets of the Marcoses, and all the documents that were obtained from the arrival of the Marcoses in Honolulu, they were all used as part of the evidences for that particular case. How many are these? That's 350,000 pages of documents. And they lined up 95 witnesses. So the trial lasted from, the jury selection sometime in March, all the way until July. So you can imagine how the daily trial actually brought about all of these evidences presented to court. There was a 12-man jury that was already earlier selected, but there was an additional 6 other members just in case any member of the regular jury would get sick or would have to beg leave and all of this. They did not want the trial to be hampered or be canceled or be delayed precisely because there was a jury that was not present. So we had 12 members of the regular jury plus 6 others. So there were about 18 of them, that were actually there, witnessing the day-to-day sessions of the trial itself. So as I was saying, this is the second part of the first part that I mentioned earlier. Both the RICO case was actually the one involved. But in New York, what happened there was Mrs. Marcos again requested if I could be there with her. I have to repeat the fact that nobody wanted to be with her at the time. This was when all the cabinet members of President Marcos were trying to avoid any association with him. Lawyers perhaps who also were friends of the Marcoses also didn't want to be associated with them, because anybody that the FBI or the CIA or the intelligence agencies or the Justice Department of America, anybody who would go to Honolulu would be photographed, fingerprinted at the airport. They would do this and then to try and find out what is the connection with the Marcoses. They might be involved in the cases, likewise, that the United States of America has filed against the Marcoses. So that is why a lot of people feared going there, and they refrained from being associated. And so there was nobody else, perhaps, or there were several others that were there, but Mrs. Marcos requested if I could join her during the trial. Firstly, because early on, in the office of one of the lawyers here in the Philippines, we were already given copies of the not only of the indictment against the Marcoses, but also a number of those evidences, so that we could find out if there were any other evidences here in the Philippines, either in government offices, that could be utilized in defense of the Marcoses. So since they knew, Imelda knew that I was going over these documents, perhaps I could help out. And that was the reason why I did help out by joining the staff of Jerry Spence, who was later on hired as the defender or the counsel of Mrs. Marcos, together with his staff. One of them was a public accountant, in fact, because this involved a lot of accounts and a lot of computations that were necessary, and also to find out the money going in and the money going out and so forth, all of these little details. Anyway, so we had 4 months of the trial, and that's exactly why I could speak this way, because I went over 350,000 pages of documents, which occupied not practically, but really one whole room in the Dag Hammarskjöld Towers. And you can imagine that the prosecution would go into the courtroom, not carrying an attaché, but pushing a grocery cart, a big grocery cart, the one that you use when you buy other items in the supermarket. Well, all the documents for the day were inside a grocery cart, because there's a voluminous documents. Okay, 350,000 documents. And they lined up 95 witnesses. So in one day, we would have, for instance, the testimonies of bank managers, testimonies of bank accountants, testimonies of other people from the Philippines who were involved possibly with knowing whether Marcos had any deposits here, any deposits there, and so forth. But as I've said, there will still have to be anyone among all of these 95 witnesses who would be able to say, clearly and categorically and with evidence presented that the money that was used to purchase those real estate properties in New York City came from the money of the Filipino people. I repeated this already in the last episode that we had here in these chronicles, that the money of the Filipino people you will find in the treasury, or perhaps in the central bank, or perhaps in the national budget. That is the money collected from us, the people, in the form of taxes. So, what that was needed insofar as all of this is concerned was that direct evidence. 95 witnesses, 350,000 pages of documents, and there was not one single document nor one single witness who could categorically say, here, this is the document that will prove that the money came from the Philippine Treasury or the Filipino people. So what happened? Well, you had all of these documents and evidences and testimonies all saying, really proving that the money was there from Switzerland, from the bank accounts in Switzerland, and from there it went to some banks in Los Angeles, and from Los Angeles banks some money was transferred to New York banks, to the Philippine National Bank as a matter of fact, and from there the purchase of the buildings were actually undertaken. But the biggest question and the most important question was, and this is what Jerry Spence asked all of these people that were testifying there, where did the money in Switzerland come from? And that nobody could answer. Nobody knew where the accounts of Switzerland came from. Where did all those millions of dollars come from? Because that is the evidence that would have proven that it came from the Philippines, from the Filipino people. But there was nobody, and there was not one single document that could prove that. And that is why at the end of the trial, after 4 months, after all these documents being presented, and all the witnesses talking and talking and talking, not one could present that single document. And so therefore, by a unanimous decision of the 12-member jury, the case was not dismissed, but there was the decision not guilty. In other words, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos were not guilty as far as the accusation of the United States of America, the RICO case violation, is concerned. So, now we challenge all of you listening to this Chronicles. If there is anyone at all at this stage that can present one witness, one single evidence in any Philippine court today that will prove that money was taken from the Filipino people, please come out and say so. Because for the past 35 years, over 1,000 cases were filed now against Imelda Marcos. But not one single document could prove that the money in the accounts that they are accusing her as having contained money did not come from the Filipino people. They were dismissed for lack of merit and dismissed for lack of evidence. 1,000 cases filed by the Philippine government against her. Perhaps at some later date, I will discuss this 1,000 cases filed against Imelda Marcos. But for now, these are the records in New York. Foley Square, the court of Judge Kinnan, and the unanimous decision, not guilty, Ferdinand and Imelda. Not a single document, not a single witness to prove that any money, 1 centavo, $1, 1 peso, 10 pesos,